This is one of my all-time favorite songs. This is, of course, Nature's Way by Spirit, Randy, California, and his stepfather, who happened to play drums in his band. Randy was a very, very talented musician and put together some great songs. Spirit, of course, had this as well. And the lesson I put together on this is very detailed about a couple things, some really important techniques that happen in this. One of them is muting the bass notes and working on your muting technique. The other is accenting notes in various places. And getting chord changes on the ands of beat 4 just before beat 1 of the measure where the chord really comes in. So this lesson is really detailed about that. If you want to mess around with the beginning, it's really just an A chord, and I'm playing it with a hinge bar, so my first finger's flattened out. I only really need the 2nd fret of the 4th and 3rd strings, because you're really only going to play 3 strings. And then you're going to add the B on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. And then take it off. So that's the opening little lick. And the lesson goes into, of course, everything else about it. It talks about reading music, reading text repeats, what a coda is, what the S sign is, what DS all coda, what DS all double coda means, and all that kind of stuff. So a very detailed lesson on a lot of peripheral, well, a lot of really important stuff that a lot of people don't always get the hang of in music. So here is a little bit of the preview from these. These lessons that I put together for Totally Guitars as part of the Target program are frequently 5, 6, 8 separate parts where we look at the left hand individually, the right hand individually, talk about the chords, maybe talk about the theory involved in the song, talk about just playing the chord progression and getting it, understanding how it works before we fine-tune it and get all the accents in the right places. And that's kind of what this lesson does. Stuff you can carry over into lots and lots of other things. So we also have a lot of free lessons there, so if you're not a Target member, you have access to 50 or 60, maybe more, free lessons that will help you get a lot of the techniques down that will carry you along into the more complicated lessons that are as part of the Target program. So really encourage you to check those out. They're also all here at our TG Free Lessons channel. And this particular preview, which is lesson step, or like the first segment of 7 or 8 videos that make up the entire lesson, goes very heavily into the history of the band and Randy, California himself, and what highlights of his life. So I sometimes do these with lessons too. Sometimes people don't like them, and but that's fine because you don't have to watch it. But just an example of some of the things that I do in the first parts of lessons. Here is the preview to the lesson on Nature's Way, and if you'd like to check out the whole thing, it is up now at Totally Guitars. Nature's Way. This is a tune by the band Spirit, who formed in the late 60s, and put out a couple albums, 68, 69, 70, had a couple of big hits, and, one big hit. But some really interesting songs. Now, we're going to take a look at this song, and pretty much play just what I did there. It's just an acoustic guitar accompaniment with some interesting techniques going on with pounding on bass notes, little muffling in the bass, some not very many chords, but some interesting syncopations where we have to get chord changes happening on the last and of a measure rather than on the first beat of the next measure, and other strums that happen at accents happening where you generally don't expect them, like in this. So there's a lot of that going on. We're also going to talk about how to follow musical directions in a song. What is a coda? What is that sign that looks like an S? Because this is a great example of a song that doesn't have very many parts, but when I wrote out the tablature to it, by using text repeats, meaning say something like DC, DS, all coda, all double coda, there is a way to turn something that could take up 6 or 8 pages worth of music into just, like in my case now, a page and a half. So that's something else we're going to cover in this lesson, is following musical directions. Now, the band, I want to talk a little bit about the album that it's from. It was their 4th album, called 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus. Now, this band had a lot of, well, even just judging by some of the pictures on this, a lot of psychedelic and progressive influences, and just came up with some very, very cool songs. So if you haven't heard much of their stuff, I really encourage you to check them out, because they're a band I really like to listen to. Now, they were formed, there's a guitar player that some people have heard of that was kind of underappreciated in his later years, named Randy California. Now, Randy was born in California, or born and raised in Southern California till he was about 15, but his name was not California. It was Randy Wolf. And his mother remarried when he was a teenager, and when he was 15, the family relocated to New York City with his stepfather, Ed Cassidy. And because Ed was a gigging jazz musician, he wanted to be in New York. And Randy, as a 15-year-old, started hanging around New York music stores, in particular Manny's Music, ran into a guitar player there who was putting a band together, the Blue Flame. And Randy and Jimmy James, who later changed his name, or later adopted the name Hendrix, were 2 guitar players in the Blue Flame. Now, Jimi Hendrix was also recruiting other people to play in his band, and he had another Randy named Palmer who played bass in there. And subsequently, he dubbed his 2 Randys, not by their last names, but by where they came from. So, you got it. One became Randy California, and Randy Palmer became Randy Texas. Well, Randy California hung on to that forever. Now, he was still 15 when Hendrix was packing up and heading to England in 1966. And Hendrix wanted him to come along. Hendrix management, not so cool on the idea. They were kind of thinking they needed a one-guitar group. But Randy's parents, even less cool on it. They said, no way, you're staying here and you're finishing school. So, turned down a chance to be another guitar player in the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and hung on in New York City. A little bit later, ran into, he and his stepfather, Ed Cassidy, decided they'd been playing more and more stuff together, and Randy was getting really talented. They put together this band, Spirit, and put out an album in 1968, just called Spirit. Had an interesting set of songs on it, one called Fresh Garbage, that was frequently covered live by a band that came over in 1968 and opened for them, known as Led Zeppelin. And Led Zeppelin was playing one of Randy's tunes in concert frequently back in those days. Another song from that album is very cool. A song called Taurus. Didn't become a hit for Spirit, but I'm sure you know where it went, what eventually happened to it. Now, they had not much too big, they were pretty popular at the time, but then they also didn't have anything that was real radio friendly, because they were a little too experimental, progressive, psychedelic, all that kind of stuff, and FM radio was not really happening yet. But on their second album, they came out with a tune that was very radio friendly. This album is called The Family That Plays Together. Probably heard that one. I Got a Line on You. Still a big hit in oldies radio stuff. So anyhow, that's kind of the quick story on Spirit. They came out with a couple more albums. The third album in 1969 was called Clear, and the fourth album in 1970, you already saw this, 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus. And then things kind of went a little bit south. They didn't really do much after that, but they really left this legacy of 4 very, very important albums to the late 60s and early 70s sound of what was happening in music. Randy unfortunately met a tragic end in 1997 when he rescued his son drowning in the surf in Molokai, and son made it. Randy didn't, unfortunately, and is no longer with us. But we do have these great tunes. And in particular this one. So it didn't mean for that to become such a long story, but what the heck. That's my little synopsis of the history of Randy, California and Spirit. And in the rest of this lesson, of course, that wasn't much of a lesson. That was just kind of a little lecture. But the rest of this lesson will be covered on how to play Nature's Way.